I was just looking into fish. Fish often catch my. No, we're in our Nach and Nash class. We're about to do the book of Tzfanya.
Oh.
And when Tzfanya describes the great destruction that's going to happen, he's talking to Yehuda, because that's all that's left. This is a few decades before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He is prophesizing. Our tradition is that he's prophesizing at the same time as Yirmiyahu and Huldah. But his prophecy is a dark vision of the destruction that's going to happen, and it's like very bold and dark, and so it begins with Hashem saying that he's going to wipe out everything. Everything's going to be wiped out, which eventually does happen in the Babylonian exile, the Babylonian destruction. But he includes the fish of the sea. He in other words, he doesn't just say, the actual language is, sorry for doing this, but if I don't talk about these things when I first see them,
it's fine.
But that language is, apparently it starts with people, animals, birds, and then fish, which somebody points out is the opposite order of creation. It's like it's sort of like undoing creation. Then the person compares it to Noach, which is also like an undoing of creation. But in Noach, there is no mention of the fish. It doesn't talk about wiping out the fish. It's also sort of weird because Yehuda is primarily like in the mountains and the area around the mountains. So to include the fish is it's unusual.
Ask him.
What? You can ask him. Go ahead.
Isn't there a midrash that during the bubble that all of the
fish boiled or something?
Yeah, that the water was boiling.
A midrash about
right. I'm it's, if you focus on the text, they are surprisingly missing from the book of Noach. And it actually stands out that they're missing from the book of Noach because previously in Bereshis, when it talked about creation, so it talks about man's role in the blessing. It says, you'll be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and you will kavshuha, you will settle it, and then you will manage the birds, the fish, and the animals. So every element of that blessing is mentioned in Noach, except for the fish. You have Noach managing the animals and the birds on the ark. You have him using the birds on the ark. You have him using the animals for sacrifice. And you have in the story of the tower, you have them making bricks, the fulfillment of kivshuha, and then the people spreading out, which is milu es haaretz but you have no discussion in the text of the fish. In the text itself, so it stands out that the fish, that there aren't fish there. Again, in the text. And whatever there, there are those who ask. There's a medrash that asks, why aren't there fish korbanos? Why aren't there fish offerings? There's offerings of birds and animals, but there aren't offerings from fish. And so their answer is that they don't have a face or something. And it sounds like what they're saying is that people don't see themselves in fish. They see themselves in animals, they can see themselves in birds, but they don't see themselves in fish, something like that. But even even there, it's sort of interestingly not there. And so it's part of my museum of things you would expect to find in the Torah, but do not. It's not, they are mentioned clearly. The Torah talks about eating fish, and the people in Egypt mention the fish that they ate in Egypt. Moshe asks, when he's asking, where will I get meat? He even says there's not enough fish even for, people to eat if I wanted to feed them fish. So there are mentions of fish that, but it's not like they're completely absent from the Torah, but there are places where you expect them to find them, you don't find them. And especially again in the text, it does in Noach. If you're going to compare that phrase to Noach, in the text it doesn't mention the fish, and here he's mentioning the fish. And also it's weird to mention the fish because you don't associate it with where Yehuda was. That they, and maybe that's a mistake. Maybe we should be thinking of that they did have ports and stuff, but also, you don't think of the territory. The territory of Yehuda doesn't go into the sea. It says the fish of the sea. Fish of the sea. It's just weird. I don't know.
What about the lakes? It's funny because in the New Testament we have fishermen and the loaves.
Right, but that's only in the north. That's in the area of the 10 tribes. It's not in the area of Yehuda. Right. So by then he wouldn't have the Galilee. The Galilee is a source. I know that's one of the interesting things. The fishermen become important to Christians. They're very important, and but they're not there in any significant way in the 5 books. There isn't a discussion of fishermen in the 5 books. There's not a discussion of fishing in the 5 books. There's not. I guess there's an assumption that the tribes that are along the sea would engage in it, but it's not emphasized. And also, you don't think of the sea as being clearly, it's not part of the territory. It's a border. It's not part of the territory of Yehuda. So if you're talking about the destruction, he actually uses the words on the earth, but he's clearly talking about the area of Yehuda, but there's something going on and he's over there. Anyways, okay.
Rabbi, do you think that the reason we don't usually hear about Zephaniah, is that because it's so dark, do you think?
Well, it's small. There are certain prophets in the 12 books. They don't have stories, first of all. They're not like Yonah has a good story. So, we're familiar with Yonah. People have heard of Amos, but do people really read Amos that much? Any of the Treyasar that are essentially prophecies that don't have much narrative. I'm not sure, but it's also a short book. It's a short book, but like Habakkuk is right before Zephaniah, and Habakkuk, I think the average person also wouldn't be familiar with, but the Gemara cites some interesting, it cites Tzadik ben Unaso Yichya. It's, in fact, there's a place in the Gemara that is talking about verses that sort of sum up the Torah, and there's an agreement that that Tzadik b'emunaso Yichya, that the righteous live with their emunah, somehow captures all of Torah. So he, and also I just saw, like in Habakkuk, he's connected to the story of Choni Amago, Choni the circle maker. The Gemara tells the story of Honi, who the people appealed to pray for rain. And so he drew a circle and he said, Hashem, I'm not stepping out of this circle until first he prayed for rain and there was no rain. Then he drew a circle and said, Hashem, I'm not leaving the circle until there's rain. And there was a little bit of rain. Then he said, that's not what I asked for. And then there was furious rain. And then he said, that's too much. And then there was less rain. But so the Gemara over there says he made a circle just like Habakkuk made a circle. So you see the Gemara draws on Habakkuk as an important, but I think the average person wouldn't have heard of Habakkuk. And also the Gemara says that while Yirmiyahu was prophesying in the streets, Tzfanya was prophesying in the shuls and in the base medrash. So, I mean, yeah, but you're right. I mean, to me, and that I just briefly looked up Tzfanya and fish. I saw there are some things, so I have more. There's more to look at, but the Treasar, they don't get the attention they deserve. There are some of them that are Haftorahs, and the book of Malachi gets quoted during Tashlich, and a lot of them are Haftorahs. But yeah, I agree. They don't get as much attention. And maybe that's why the fish thing doesn't get as much attention. I'm open to that. It's a weird mention of the fish, I'll tell you that. So yesterday we were talking about defecating. And next we are something a little more mundane. That is that he commanded us to return the stolen item itself, if it is still remaining as itself, with the addition of a fifth if he swore about it, or to give its value if it was transformed. And that is his, God's, may he be exalted, saying, and he shall return the stolen item. And they already explained in Tractate Makot that the negative commandment of robbery is a negative commandment that is rectified by a positive commandment. And they said about this that scripture said, you shall not rob, and he shall return the stolen item. And the regulations of this commandment have already been explained above a comma. It's a little bit weird the way this is presented, but that's as he's explaining. There is a negative commandment. We know it well. It's mentioned in the 10 Commandments that you shall not steal. There are more detailed discussions of stealing throughout several of the Torah portions. So it is a negative commandment. We are not in the negative commandments. We're in the positive commandments. So there happens to be a positive commandment. Yeah.
That's fine.
Oh, sorry. There's a positive commandment.
Oh my God, Zen. Oh my God, honest.
I hope everything's okay still. There's a positive commandment, which is associated with the negative commandment. If somebody does steal, there is a positive commandment to return what they stole. So the Rambam is saying that if you have it, let's say somebody had a stamp collection, somebody else stole his stamp collection. So there is a positive commandment to return the stamp collection. If the stamp collection is still as it was, in other words, he stole the stamp collection, it's still intact, the positive commandment is to actually return the item. It would appear that once the person has returned the item, they have done tshuva. In other words, they have repented of the crime. The crime was stealing, and the repair for the crime is to return what they stole. What if the person stole it, then they were accused of stealing it, and they're in court, and they swear in court, it's very possible this is true outside of court, but if they swear, let's just say, in court that they did not steal it, in such a case, they don't have to return anything. But if it was found out afterwards that they did in fact steal it, so again, they have to return the object. If they admit to having stolen it without without witnesses, they admit after they swore, they have a change of heart and they admit that they stole it, then they not only return the object itself, they also add a fifth of its value. And whenever the Torah says a fifth of its value, the way we figure that is really what we would call a quarter of its value, because it means a fifth. Once it's been added, it amounts to a fifth of the total. So we would call that adding a quarter. And then they bring an offering, which is a guilt offering. So those would all be part of positive commandments. So again, primarily, this is a subject that is covered by negative commandments. Do not steal. But there is a kind of repair available if the person regrets and wants to fix it. There is a positive commandment for him to return the item. Again, if the item is in its original condition, you return the item itself. If it is not, or he doesn't have it anymore, then he would return the value of the item at the time that he stole it. And again, if there was an oath taken, he would also add a fifth and bring an offering. And those would all be part of positive commandments. So that's why they're brought here. Again, there are many things that we have talked about before have negative commandments in the sort of galaxy of discussion of those things, but we haven't talked about them yet because we're only talking about the positive commandments.
Rabbi Karsh?
Yes.
So, how far does the command to return it extend? In other words, am I allowed to steal from a thief to return it to its original owner?
That would not. Yeah, so let's say somebody else returned it. I'm assuming that would fall under the category of returning a lost item and not under the category of, I am quite certain, although I must admit, even though we just studied many of these laws in the Tractate of Bava Kama in Daf Yomi, I am almost positive that the only one who can fulfill this mitzvah is the thief himself. If somebody else, I am almost certain that if somebody else returned an object that was stolen, that they would be fulfilling the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, of returning a lost item, as opposed to the mitzvah of returning a stolen item. Almost positive. that that's the
Hmm.
case. Stealing from a thief is a subject. In other words, are you let's say one person stole something and then somebody else stole from the thief. Is that stealing in the strictest sense? That is a subject that is discussed. Certainly, certainly if the original guy has not given up on it, if the original guy has not given up on it, it is not, strictly speaking, it doesn't belong to the thief. However, so they're not the sort of interested party when it comes with stealing in this sense. The first guy is your interested party. But if the first guy gave up on it, then it technically belongs to the thief, and then it would be a violation to steal from a thief, because you are taking something that belongs to him, even though he might not deserve it in your mind, but it technically does belong to him. He still has a mitzvah to return it. He always, if he wants to do tshuva, he's gonna still have to return it, but he technically owns it if the guy gave up on it. It's a sort of interesting feature of ownership, this notion of yush, that you can lose ownership if you give up on an item. In most cases, there is a question of how it exactly works. What is the mechanism? But there's an assumption of a psychological bond between owner and object. And when you release the connection, you in certain circumstances could lose the ownership of that thing, and it could be available for others to own it. This is especially true with lost objects. It comes up in more broad discussion of lost objects. This is the tractate we're beginning now in Bava Metzia. We haven't gotten to this discussion yet about lost objects. But so for instance, let's say you're a treasure hunter and forget about international law or the law of countries, because that confuses things, because there is something called dina de machusa dina. You're supposed to follow the laws of the land, and they may very well apply. But let's say you weren't doing that. You were just looking at the Torah's understanding. If you raise a sunken ship, even if it was a relatively recent sinking of that ship, technically whoever salvaged it would be the owner. You would become the owner, even if it was very recent. In other words, the Gemara says, if the guy is standing on the beach and he yells, "I don't give up, I don't give up, I don't give up," on the property as it's sinking, the Gemara says that it doesn't matter, because everybody would. So the fact that this guy is signaling to us that he, as an outlier, is not giving up on it, the law is still going to apply. I don't know what the actual halacha is. I admit that it's a famous Gemara that even if he's standing there and shouting it. So if you're salvaging something, the assumption is when a boat sinks, the owner doesn't think they're ever getting it back. And so that's an assumption of yush, that the person has given up ownership, and they really do lose ownership of it. Even if it was a tremendous amount, they actually do lose ownership of it. Now, they have the ability, if they want to go and try and salvage it, but it would be available to other people. It wouldn't be a lost object that the finder would have to return to the other person. so that's a kind of dramatic demonstration of this notion of yush. But yush can also apply to stolen objects. So there is a book called Contemporary Halachic Questions by Rabbi Bleich from Yeshiva University. They're just masterfully presented. He'll take a kind of interesting contemporary question and do the research. And in doing the research and presenting it to us, he's, in a sense, giving us a treatment of the subject all the way going back to the verses in the Torah till some kind of final resolution. And you really get to see the full discussion of it. So one of the questions that he treated was this Bible that belonged to there was a rabbinical seminary in Berlin, and I believe it was during Kristallnacht that it was sacked and burnt, the rabbinical seminary. Somebody who worked at the seminary they didn't have any ownership interest in the seminary. They just worked at the seminary, saved the Bible. They ran into the building, saved the Tanakh. And they then, saved it throughout the war. And then after the war, they brought it to America. And then it just remained with them. Nobody knew. They just sort of remained with them for several decades. And then they decided, I don't know if it was the original people or their children, decided to offer it at auction. And then it became a big controversy because when it got out that this Bible still existed, the people who had an ownership interest in the Bible, in the rabbinical seminary, and again, by now it might have been the children of those people, claimed that this person had no right to it originally. They didn't have any ownership in it, whereas their family had ownership in it. So this person shouldn't be able to sell it. So this became quite a controversial issue. It was eventually resolved. I think a donor bought it and then donated it to JTS, I think, something like that. And that was an agreed upon solution. Somehow all the families agreed to that in the end. There was a mediated kind of solution to it. But he was talking about it from a halachic perspective. And one of the questions that came up was, once they know that the building's been sacked by the Nazis, they have, as was clear, a presumption that it was destroyed. So that amounts to yush, which is giving up on it. And therefore, if somebody else took it, they're taking it after the person has given up on it, and that should be their right. In other words, once the original owners have given up, it was certainly more complex than that. This question also involves art that was taken by the Nazis, looted by the Nazis. If it was brought to a halachic court, let's say it was sitting in some gallery somewhere, like that movie with Helen Mirren, the Golden, what was it called? It was a kind of fictional representation of a true story, but there's a bunch of these stories. So the question is, does the original family really have a right to get it returned to them? Can they demand that it be returned to them? So this question of yush comes up, even when things are being stolen from you. Once you have assumed it was lost, as you would because the Nazis took it, you're not assuming it exists anymore, or that you're ever getting it back. Wouldn't that amount to yush? And then you wouldn't own it anymore. So weirdly, if the original owner does have yush, the thief becomes the owner of it. And yeah, So anyways, that question of Yush is fascinating and complex. Also the notion that we have a psychological connection to our property is fascinating. Okay.
Isn't yours kind of, it's psychological. I mean, I don't know, you might think you have Yush, and then you see someone wearing the scarf you thought you'll never see again.
And once again, you feel that's yours.
And then
That
you
is
feel
your
it's,
psychological reaction.
yeah,
You feel it's yours. It's like it's always been yours. It was just hiding. I know. That's a
maybe you've never really
like-
given up though. I don't know. It's
right.
psycho-
So, but that may be interesting to explore psychologically, but legally, we may not be able to make that kind of distinction. I don't think we do, but you're right. I mean, that does bring up a question as to sort of the legal basis for Yush. What is it
Right.
really based on? But I don't
I
think
think it should apply to an aguna. I think it should apply to an aguna.
I was thinking the same thing.
she's lost. She's lost.
Well, she gave up hope he'd ever come back.
She's willing to give up hope, and they're saying.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in marriage. It only works in when it comes to objects, but not to human connections. Are we to equate our relationship to an object to our relationship to our spouse? Okay. Massive subject coming up after one that appears to be, at least on paper, a more legal one. That is that he commanded us to give charity and to strengthen the weak and to ease their situation. This command has already appeared with varying words. He may be exalted, saying, "You must surely open your hand." And he said, "You must support him." And he said, "And your brother shall live with you." But the intention of all these expressions is one, and that is that we help them and support them sufficiently for their requirements. The laws of this commandment are already explained in many places in Ketubot and Bava Basra. The received tradition has appeared about this, that even a poor person living off of charity is obligated in this commandment, meaning charity, whether to someone lower than to him or similar to him, and even with something small. So he, again, is not going into all the details. In the Leviticus, in the Vayikra quotes, which are from the Torah portion of Bahar, the fact that it talks about your brother is an indication that there may be certain people where you have more of an obligation than others. In other words, there might be a hierarchy when it comes to giving tzedakah. After all, people have limited means. You're not going to be able to help everybody in need. And you're certainly not going to be able to help everybody resolve their need. So if that's an assumption that we make, then we have to have some direction as to what to do when we find out about people that are in need. Also, is there a difference between people that approach us directly or people that we find out about their need, but they didn't approach us? There's all sorts of, and so we are going to end up having to develop some kind of system when it comes to carrying out this mitzvah, and it eventually ends up having to be some kind of really thought out system that is able to help us distinguish between requests or our observations of need, and then how to carry it out, and that needs mentoring. There is a good deal of mentoring in the Shulchan Aruch. This is discussed in Yoreh De'ah, the mitzvah tzedakah, but even there's still a lot that gets left out. and you can just imagine, you don't have to imagine because you guys have had this experience, but you have people that have a perceived need that they want resolved, and you may not be able to resolve their perceived need. That's how they express their need. You may not be able to resolve it. It could be nobody. It could be billionaires could not resolve the perceived need of somebody. So what amounts to need when we say that somebody needs something? There are Gemaras that say a person should be treated in the standard they once had. So let's say somebody's fallen on hard times, but originally lived at a certain kind of standard, then the suggestion is that it's right for them to expect to be returned to a state that they once enjoyed. Well, what if they were a very wealthy person? So it seems like that there is direction in the Gemara that even if they were a wealthy person, they have a right to, if means are available, they have a right to be returned to an earlier status. So you could, as we all know, this is not an easy subject. Balancing what the person thinks they need with what you're kind of vetting. It's not an easy thing, especially when you're approached by a person who feels needy. It's very hard, and also it's not always easy to tell, because if somebody is a fundraiser, they're always in need, and so you have to somehow sift through that as well, because you want to be useful, you want to be helpful, and you certainly want them to appreciate it. So sometimes you have to ignore what they're saying, and find a way to resolve or make something better with your own perception and your own wisdom from experience, because you can't rely as much on what they're saying to you. Being both, being a fundraiser myself, I can tell you that there are many strategies employed, and of course you never are supposed to tell somebody that you're doing well. There always has to be some kind of dire circumstance around the corner, and so that encourages fundraisers to present it in the most dramatic way, and that can be very hard. But it does appear that if somebody is family, especially direct relatives, that they get priority in the hierarchy, so that's a thing. And then there's a discussion. The Rambam has levels of ways to give, best ways to give. If you can give without the other person knowing, so in other words, giving so that the person doesn't lose their dignity, finding somebody a job as opposed to just giving them money, teaching somebody a skill, so that they can earn money on their own in a dignified way. These are considered very high in the hierarchy of it. He doesn't over here mention anything about tithing. Here he seems to be talking about people, you've come across somebody with a particular need. And so your responsibility, as he said, is strengthen the weak and ease their situation. Again, a lot of these cases are where maybe the person approached you, but he doesn't seem to make a distinction. If you see somebody that is in a poor situation, you are supposed to strengthen them and ease their situation, whether they've approached you or they haven't, if you know about it. All right, we'll talk more about this it's a very important and big mitzvah. We'll talk more about this on Monday. I look forward to doing that with you guys.